Good morning and welcome back to the 76th of our 365 short Bible studies. At the moment, we're looking at ancient sagas from days 71 to 87. I'm looking at the covenant that God made with Moses and how the new priesthood was established. Moses has been talking to God and has received the Ten Commandments up in the mountain. Meanwhile, today we see what was happening down at the foot of the mountain. Exodus chapter 32, verses 1 to 6. When the people noticed that Moses had not come down from the mountain but remained there a long time, they gathered round Aaron. They said to him, "We have no idea what has become of this fellow Moses who led us out of Egypt. We want you to make us some gods to lead us." Aaron replied, "Let's have the gold earrings your wives' sons and daughters are wearing. Bring them to me." So everyone took them off and brought them to him. He melted them and poured the gold into a mould in the shape of a bull calf. The people said, "Look, Israel, these are your gods that brought you out of the country of Egypt." When Aaron saw, he built an altar in front of it, and Aaron made a proclamation saying, "Tomorrow shall be a feast day to Yahweh." The next day they got up early and offered burnt offerings and brought peace sacrifices, and the people sat down to eat and drink and got up to have a party. On the face of it, reading this passage, it looks as if, before they knew better, the descendants of Jacob had absorbed certain ideas about God from Egyptian and other Middle Eastern idol worshippers. But if you find that hard to believe, maybe you agree with those scholars who say that this story was made up many years later, during the time when the united Israelite kingdom split in two. That's around 931 BC, when Jeroboam, the rebel king of northern Israel, himself ordered an image of Yahweh to be made in the shape of a bull to tempt his people away from going south into Judah to Jerusalem to make their traditional pilgrimages and sacrifices. Whichever way you read it, we evidently have problems with today's reading. This version of Aaron makes a graven image of Yahweh in the shape of a bull. But carefully, to preserve his reputation, he is not blamed or condemned for doing it, and the whole blame is placed on the unenlightened people who demanded it. In the rest of the narrative that follows, Aaron is firmly associated with goodness and righteousness, with the priesthood, and later with the care of the Ark of the Covenant. So we're obliged to ask how his name came to be associated with such a blatant act of sabotage on the nature of God. My own observation is that amongst the people, there was a continuing long-term liking for the worship of the pagan gods and their images, and that went on at least until the Babylonian exile around 587 BC. We can see such practices still being condemned up to that point. See, for example, in Ezekiel chapter 6. It was during the exile that Ezekiel spoke about the invisible Yahweh transporting himself from the destroyed temple in Jerusalem and coming in a surreal vision to the exiles by the river Chebar in Babylonia. See Ezekiel chapter 1. It is likely then that the struggle between the invisible God and the pagan idols was still a live issue during the exile, and the story about the golden calf may well have originated in the preaching of the early rabbis around the time of the Babylon exile. Remember that the condemnation of graven images in the Ten Commandments is really not absolute, since we have twin, possibly related stories of God telling Moses, say, this is Numbers chapter 21, verses 8 and 9, which should be compared with Exodus chapter 4, verse 3, of God telling Moses actually to make a graven image, this one of a serpent, as a healing sign, or giving him a stick that becomes a snake as a kind of miracle wand. Some, even today, believe in the efficacy of such signs. The important thing to remember is not to worship a representation of God, which will inevitably be inadequate, instead of actually worshipping God. And for us, that means recognizing any representation, including words, images, mental pictures, poetry, and doctrines, because they also only are pale representations of God's actual reality. Now, tomorrow we have the puzzling picture of Moses with a shining face, and we'll look at that with our critical faculties switched on in just the same way. See you tomorrow.